We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri people, part of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
Welcome to African Australians Conversations. This is a podcast series that amplifies the voices and contributions of African Australians to Australia's multicultural identity. Through interviews, thematic episodes, and community storytelling, the podcast will explore migration, identity, creativity, and civic impact, challenging stereotypes, and celebrating diversity at the same time. Today, I'm talking to Nii Adjei, a Gen Z born in Australia to Ghanaian parents. We will explore Nii's experience as a Gen growing up in Australia and his hopes and aspirations for African Australian Gen Zs. Welcome, Nii.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we continue, Nii in the Ghanaian language means Nana, right?
Yeah. In the, depending on which tribe and, the language, the translation, that's right, yeah.
Yes, the Ghana language
that's
means
right.
Nana.
Yeah.
So, welcome, Nana Nii.
Thank you.
Nii, can you tell us a little about yourself, where you grew up?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Nii Adjei, and I was born in Canberra, and I lived there for about 23 years before I moved to Melbourne a few years ago, actually 3 years this week. I definitely have a lot of passions in my life, but I think the best way for me to describe it would be just to narrow it down through two lanes, I guess. It's like art and science are the two biggest things in my life, I've always been obsessed with writing and storytelling, I usually say that I started writing technically before I could read because, when I was a kid, I would just draw short story, like comic books, little comic panels and stuff that would just show sequences of events, and I'd show them to my family, and I've been doing that since I was 4 or something, very, very young age. And then, I've been really into science as well from a very young age. I have a degree in psychology. But lately art has been a massive focus in my life. I'm a filmmaker in terms of writing and directing, and I'm starting to get a bit into acting as well. So yeah, that is a bit about myself.
So tell us, what makes you come alive?
Yeah. So I guess for me, the thing that makes me come alive, it's one thing that I really love is, I really do I love to make people laugh, definitely. I wouldn't say that I'm a funny person per se, because that's not up to me. It's up to whoever I'm speaking with to determine that.
Absolutely.
But that's something that I really love. I also really like writing, especially. When you're writing something and the characters get away from you, it does feel like you're flying. And then, the other 50% of the time, Christopher Nolan has a quote about how sometimes writing will feel like, it's going great, and then the other 50% it feels like you're pulling teeth.
Yes.
And that's definitely something that is less fun, but when it is going well, the fact that it was tough before makes it feel like that much sweeter. when it's going well. So I guess like sharing stuff is probably what makes me feel most alive.
Does AI help these days?
I do not use AI for my writing, and I don't intend to in the future. That's probably just more of an indicator of my ego and arrogance that I don't think a computer could write better than me. But that's just, just a personal belief that I have.
Absolutely.
I've been writing for a long time, and, the fun of writing is, for me, is like racking my brain and like solving problems, and, I feel most comfortable doing that on my own.
Yeah. Well, so we're still exploring your background. So is there a memory in your childhood that make you smile or feel proud about that you want to tell us about?
So like childhood, okay, so like early ages. Let me think.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember I went to, the first time I visited Ghana, and I guess the last time I was in Ghana was when I was quite young. I might have been like 3 or something, and I know like people usually don't remember that much at that age, and I don't remember much of anything else except for going to Ghana, and I guess it's because it was so different to me. I still remember I remember like a bit of my experiences that like they still feel quite vivid. Like I remember being at the beach, and I remember sort of like having ice cream like at like my family's like like outside the house. I remember being like super hot and like humid.
Yes.
That's something that's a memory that's definitely very important to me. So that's a very sweet memory.
Okay, thank you. So, how do you describe your identity? Do you describe yourself as African Australian, Gen Z, or something entirely different?
Well, for the longest time, like when I was like a teenager, and like I wasn't really aware of how generations worked. I thought I was a millennial because I was like the generation that was at the forefront of like I guess the culture in the early 2010s. So I thought I was millennial, but I'm actually technically Gen Z because depending on what source or publication you're going by, Gen Z starts at like 95 is like usually like a good estimate. So me being 99, that puts me as like a bit of an older Gen Z. But like, yeah, I definitely consider myself Gen Z. I do consider myself African Australian as well. That's something that is definitely, very important to me. And it's important that I embrace that part of myself. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, like when people like, it's something that I notice that not everyone does, which is interesting to me, is that if you have a name that's not like easily pronounceable by like an English speaker, and if someone mispronounces it, sometimes people don't correct the pronunciation, but I found that I haven't done that. Like it's very rare that I just like let someone just mispronounce my name, and it like when I correct them, it's not because I'm like I'm like mad or like offended or anything. It's just more like like I want you to be able to connect with me authentically, and for me to for you to connect with me, I have to be able to connect with you, and so it's important that my name, the one that you're saying matches the one that I've heard my entire life. But yeah, like like I remember I had a friend who I'd been calling one name for like years, and then he one day just like corrected me. He was like, "Oh, by the way, it's pronounced this way," and I'm like, "I've been calling you that for years," and I had no idea. Like it's crazy. So yeah, no, like being Gen Z and being African Australian is super important.
Well, talking about correct pronunciation, so should I be referring to you as Gen Z or Gen Z?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I guess like obviously in Australia we pronounce it Z, but like in in America and every other place they call it Gen Z, so I don't really mind either way.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so Nii, what does home mean to you? Is it just a place, a feeling, or a community?
I think I think it can definitely be all three. You know, home. When I think of home, I think like it's somewhere where you feel safe, and it's where you can be yourself. So that doesn't need to be like four walls and a roof per se. Um, it can be doing something that makes you feel like yourself. So that could be engaging in like some kind of hobby. It can be hanging out with your friends or with people who are like-minded.
Yes.
I guess in that sense, home technically would be a feeling like at the most fundamental level, because it's places and communities that make you feel like you're safe and make you feel like you can be yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, look, I'm interested in this because I think that uh, people of my generation, I think some of us have been caught in this dilemma between our countries of birth still being home and Australia also being home. And yes, I agree with your description of home being a place that provides safety and comfort. And for me, when I say that Australia is home, it's because I feel safe and comfortable, that Australia provides me with the opportunity to pursue my interest, grow, and extend myself. So, yeah, thank you for that. So, you know, your parents were born in Ghana, but you've lived all your life in Australia. So, in a way, uh, you've grown up effectively in two cultures. Your parents' culture, which no doubt you would have experienced at home, and the Australian culture. Have you felt caught between these cultures?
Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely have felt that because there's obviously the Australian culture, which is essentially the Western culture developed in a in an environment. The path through which it develops is very different to the path through which West African and like Ghanaian culture develops. So there are things that are definitely different, and yet I have definitely felt that growing up. I have felt caught between the two cultures. Yes.
And how has this experience shaped your life?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think like when it comes to creativity and art, I actually think it's an essential aspect of like why and how I'm able to create the art that I create or even like consume the art that I like to consume because like I grew up in Canberra and Canberra, at least when I was younger, was like a pretty predominantly like European, like Caucasian city, and I went to school, and like school was also mostly European Caucasian people. So like in that sense, I've been technically like an outsider, right?
Yes.
Just because I am different, but growing up outside of like I guess those conventions means that I'm most comfortable making stuff that's unconventional because that's where I already exist is outside like the borders anyway.
Yes.
So like it's something that I even just like noticed just I guess a few years ago was that like when I'm like writing a movie, or I'm like, or like I want to direct something, I I never am like, oh, like I want this to be super like crazy and like out of the box. It's more like I make it and then I look at it and I'm like, oh, like this is nice. Like it doesn't fit anything that I've seen before, like, or what the conventions are of what a typical film or a screenplay is supposed to be. But if it feels so natural to me, it's because like I'm already, again, I feel the most comfortable and at home when I'm already like not sort of included in like a boundary. So it's actually been helpful being an outsider. And there's lots of artists, that I look up to who feel the same way, like someone like Donald Glover and Tyler, the creator. They're people who've spoken about how they didn't feel accepted, or they felt like too that they were a bit outcasts. And like you look at their art and it's really special and innovative and unconventional. And I think that's something that helped them create that kind of art.
Okay. Yeah, look, as I said at the beginning, this podcast is also about educating our fellow Australians, letting them know that we're here, we're part of this community, and wanting them to embrace us the same way as we embrace them. So, is there anything in your experience that you wish our fellow Australians understood more about African Australians, and particularly African Australian Gen Zs?
100%. I mean, I guess the thing that I get the most, and it's not really people from my generation per se, but definitely people from an older generation. Like they do like to ask me like where I'm from, which I always find is a strange question because, like I'm from Australia, and and sometimes they seem a bit surprised by that, and I'm just like 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 people have been entering this country since the beginning of time, and it's interesting that I don't know, like I guess one thing I'd want other Australians to know is that if you see someone who's a person of color, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily a puzzle box you need to crack. Be like, oh, like how did they get here? That's so weird. Like I've never looked at somebody and been like, oh, like I need to know, like through what method did they acquire entry into this country? Like it's interesting that that because like when I hear that, obviously like it makes me feel like I don't belong here, which is obviously not true.
Yes.
But if you hear it like all your life from like other people and stuff, it definitely gets it gets annoying, definitely. So that would be nice, and and that's the reason why it's not a nice thing to hear. I get that, if you're asking the question, you're showing interest.
Yes.
And especially like if it's not the first thing you say to me, that's not bad. But oftentimes it'll be like the first thing that someone asks me is like, "How did you get here?"
Yes.
And I was like, I don't know. I just woke up one day and I was in Australia. Like like that's what happened.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like, we don't have to worry about that. Like I'm here, I'm chilling, and that's definitely one thing I'd like other people to know. And I guess another thing too I'd like other Australians to know is I guess you should expand your view of what Africa is as a continent, because first of all, like Africa isn't just one giant sort of like broad stroke place. You can just be like, oh, I went to Africa.
Yes.
It's like, whereabouts did you go?
Yes.
Because it's such a, it's a continent with 53 countries.
Absolutely.
And, I get that a lot of the representation of Africa you see is like people in poverty and like struggling and stuff. And that's obviously a problem in Africa, but there's also a lot of, it's an incredibly resource rich place, and there's a lot of, and people are thriving there, and there's businesses, and they're healthy and they're happy. So I would also like people to have a little bit more of a nuanced view of Africa as a place. I would
Yes.
say, yeah.
Now, coming back to your comment about people asking you where you're from, I get that a lot,
Yeah.
right? And yes, like you, when people ask me, where you from? I say, I'm Australian. And then they look surprised. And then they say, but. And I said, okay, you've asked the wrong question. The right question should be, where were you born, or where did you come from originally? But I find that when I educate them that way, they recognize that they've asked the wrong question, and then it begins a conversation. My interpretation is that it's not that people want to offend.
Yeah.
It's an entree into trying to have a conversation with you. But I agree with you that sometimes it can be a confronting question. But I take the view, or my approach is, hey, this person does not know how to approach me. They've asked the wrong question, and through dialogue, I let them know that they should have asked a different question.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
Okay, Nii, what are your dreams for yourself to begin with? And then your community and the country that you're now part of and is your home.
Sure. Well, I wanted to be a director since I was 7. Like, you might even remember me talking about that when I was a kid.
Yes.
And so, that's my dream, to be a filmmaker. And I'm living that dream right now, which is really great. It's something that's important to me, that I don't sort of wait for some kind of, whether it be arbitrary or, something that's outside of my control. I don't want to wait for that to happen before I decide I'm living my dream. I can just look inwards and be like, okay, what am I doing? I'm writing. I'm like planning movies. That's really all I want, and anything else from there is just like an extra bonus. So like, it's an important attitude for me to have. And then dreams for the community. I definitely want people to be themselves and be comfortable in expressing what they like and who they are and doing what they want to do. That's very important to me, because I think a lot of things in this world would be much better off if people didn't do things that they felt they needed to, and instead did things that they actually wanted to do. And you don't have to. And I realize I'm quite lucky in having always known what I wanted to do, but like, you don't have to have anything really figured out by any age. It's a completely noble endeavor to try a bunch of different things and see what resonates with you. And I definitely want people to be kinder to each other as well, and sort of like not get sucked down so much, sort of like in terms of like animosity and I guess anger towards other people. Like, I remember learning in psychology this concept of like internal versus external attribution of behaviour. So the way that works is,
Yes.
like the typical example that a textbook might give you is when you're, in traffic and you're driving down the road and someone cuts you off at like an exit or something.
Yes.
You'll see that person and you'll be like, oh, that guy's super rude. He's a terrible driver. Like, he could have hurt somebody. I hate him. And that's what psychologists call internal attribution of behavior. You're attributing their behavior to something about them, something about their personality, versus if you had to cut someone off at an exit and you were justifying your own behavior, you might say, "Oh, I was running late," or I was about to miss the turn and I didn't realize, and that's external attribution of behavior, which is when you're attributing your behavior to the situation.
Yes.
And it's a definitely, and it's we give ourselves the benefit of that doubt, but we don't always extend it to other people. So that's something to try and keep in mind. Like, I know earlier I was just like, oh, people should ask me about where I'm from and everything. But like it's like, just because someone has external attributions for the behavior doesn't make the behavior okay, but it does just give you sort of like a more realistic, and I do think a little bit more of a more comprehensive understanding of the person and why they might have done that. It's just something that can help you not, get so mad at other people.
Yes, yes. Yeah, now, from what you've told me so far, I get the impression that you're somebody that is excited about making change. So, do you see yourself as a change maker?
Change maker. Well, I have to think about how do I want to answer this, because like I don't want to be like, yeah, I'm a change maker. Like it's me myself.
All right,
I'm the only
let
person.
me
Yeah.
expand. So, as a change maker, right? What change will excite you most, or excites you most?
Can it it can be like anything. Like, it can be like
Yeah.
at the
So you're given the opportunity
yeah.
to make a difference in the community. Okay. What will excite you
Yeah.
to bring about that change in the community in a way that improves the community?
Well, honestly, something that could really help the community is, I think, greater strides in representation in the media.
Yes.
And, for me, I think a greater representation of African Australians would be amazing in the media. Now, obviously, especially as of late, there have been really great strides that have been made in that regard. Even looking at something like Heartbreak High, the new Netflix series. We have a prominent African Australian character in the form of the English teacher, and that's really, really great, and I love how it's like that show was very, very diverse for lots of really great reasons, and it feels really authentic to, I guess, like the world that I've experienced as a younger person, and I, as also just growing up in the younger generation where there's been more opportunity for migration. Obviously, that's just inevitable. Like, people my age rarely ever like pose the question of like where I'm from or whatever, like because they just grew up in a different time.
Yes.
But when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of African Australian representation on the television. Like, I don't remember really seeing any on the TV shows that I watched.
No.
And yeah, and so media and entertainment and art, it does affect and reflect the real world. So if we want African Australians to feel more at home here, and again, like we talked about, what does home mean? We want them to feel safer here and feel more like they can be themselves. I think greater representation is a really excellent place to start. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm glad that you've brought the issue of representation. I think that's been my observation, that African Australians are not adequately represented in the media. And working on this podcast, that has been one of my challenges. I have approached SBS, I've approached the ABC, the SBS as the multicultural broadcaster, the ABC as a national broadcaster. And the response I got was that the podcast does not meet their requirements. And my question is, why not? And how can we, formulate something like this to meet your requirement? But then you don't get the opportunity to have that dialogue to say, hey, these are the challenges that we're having. We have younger generation like you coming after us that we need to create opportunities for. How do we create those opportunities and make sure that they're going to have a voice and going to have the ability to be visible in the media and contribute to multicultural Australia?
Yeah, it's definitely a really complex issue, and I'm not necessarily speaking from the perspective of someone who has tons of industry experience and understands oh, this is the stuff that we need to do XYZ.
Yeah.
I'm really just speaking here as someone who's creating at the independent level and then also a viewer and a consumer of these media and art products. It's tough because you want, ideally you want products and projects and works of art that are about African Australians from African Australian creatives,
yes.
or at least people who are or at least they're heavily involved in the process, because there's just certain things that are very germane to the experience of being African Australian that someone else from another group might not understand. If I was to create a show or a story that was about the female experience, and I was the only one in charge, or even if I had any substantial leadership role, I don't know if that would make a lot of sense because I don't know the experience firsthand.
Yes.
So there are just blind spots that I would have. Now, at the same time, you could definitely create a show that's just all about women, and I do think if it's important to have representative, I think, voices that are representative of the group involved in the creation of the project. Obviously, it's such it is a delicate subject because just depending on who you ask, for me, I look at something like Django Unchained, right?
Uh-huh.
Which I'm not sure if you've seen Django Unchained.
Yes.
But it's by Quentin Tarantino.
Yes.
Who is a Caucasian man.
Yes.
And I really love that movie, and I think it's profoundly empowering. But it's just no one else could have made that movie. And obviously there are things that I don't always agree, I don't really agree with the film, but nonetheless I think it did an excellent job. So yeah, that's why it's such a complex issue, right? Tarantino he's one in a billion, so maybe it's not a great example. But it does show that it's a tricky subject. But I do think at the core of it, it's important to, if you're talking about an experience, you have people who are members of that experience informing or making up the production team.
Okay, Nii, this is another challenge for you. If you had the opportunity to design a future Australia, how would it look like?
Design a future Australia. Well, it would be great to have, obviously Australia is a very multicultural place, and it would just be great to have a culture where we really deeply embrace that part of ourselves, and we're able to learn about all different kinds of cultures. Like, it was great in school, what we would learn about particular indigenous cultures that were just like, surrounding at least like our city. We'd learn a little bit about them and learn about their history. That was really great. I I often wonder, like, I'm thinking back to history in school. Obviously, we learn a lot about Australian history, and we learn a little bit about European history because obviously, like, with the two major conflicts of the 20th century did inform, like, what our country was doing.
Yes.
But like, I think it would be great to learn about, like, me personally, I would love to learn about West African history and African history in school, just like as part of like a wider curriculum. Because I remember learning about medieval Japan in school and medieval Europe. It would be great to also learn about Africa as well, because it's such an essential part of the world. Obviously, like, there's so many natural resources there. So that's something I would really like. I talk a lot about representation, just because it's very important to me. So that would be something that's essential to me. And another thing that I think would be really awesome to see, and like I've even, like at the education level, I've spoken with like some of my friends are teachers, and they're saying that we're starting to see this, which is really good, is more focus on the emotional intelligence side of things. Like, it would be great if psychology is, or at least just like emotions is like a core subject, like with English and like maths, because like, we're all humans, and we should have a really excellent understanding of emotions, because it's the most fundamental part of how we move through the world. Yeah.
Well, from time to time, I hear, political leaders and even people from the broader community talk about migrants, including African Australians, not assimilating. Well, in your view, what is assimilation?
Assimilation. Like, the first thing when I hear assimilation, like, I guess, well, I guess it's about learning the culture, and sort of like the cues and the conventions, but I think ideally that happens in a way where you're not giving up your own cultural rituals and practices, which it can be. I think it can be difficult, I guess, in like the public facing side of things. Like, it's easy to practice your own culture at home, but outside of the home, I can see how it could be more challenging. But I think that's that's the fun and exciting and challenging part of being a multicultural society, is that it's, well, like, we do have this sort of like mix of all these different places and ideas, and I think that's what makes it a really interesting and like beautifully textured fabric of like people. So yeah, people, like, obviously just to function in any part of the world you go to, doesn't matter where you go, like, you do have to learn about the cues and conventions, but ideally, you don't have to give up the things that make you authentically you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very beautiful answer, and that's how I see assimilation into a new community or a new society. That you still have the culture from which you've come, but also you learn about the values, the norms of your adopted country, and you do your best to live by those norms to create societal harmony. At the end of the day, I believe that when people talk of assimilation, they're talking about a way that we can all come together and create harmony in society. And I agree with you that we can do that without having to, abandon the cultures that our parents, or in your case, your parents have come from. So, coming back to how we as African Australians contribute to multicultural Australia. And we've had a conversation, well, through this conversation, we've touched on areas that you believe we are making contributions. So you, at a personal level, how do you believe you're making a contribution? Is it through the arts, which is your passion, study, or activities that you undertake within the community?
Well, when I'm making any kind of work of art, it's really important to me that whatever I'm writing, whatever I'm creating is very it's very, very, very extremely personal. And like the only audience member I'm really thinking about, in the stage of idea generation and creating is myself, not myself as a creator, but myself as like an audience member. Like,
Sure.
Like how would I feel watching this, and like are there things that would draw me to this product once it's finished? And so it's tough to think about how other people might take the stuff that I make, but I guess I hope that, as someone who is Australian and who is African Australian, maybe people have ideas of what an African Australian is, and they might see some kind of work that I've made, and it would be great if that's able to at least change the way somewhat how they might look at people like me. If I commit and endeavor to be as myself as possible in my art, which does mean making art for myself, but if it connects with someone else,
Yes.
which is obviously always the goal,
Yes.
right? Because like the magic of art is you make something just for yourself, and then it happens to connect with XYZ people, and I think there's no cheating that. Like that's what makes art very special from other human pursuits.
Yes.
So look, if people connect with the stuff that I make, it will be great if it has that kind of impact on them.
Yes.
So I guess that's one way I'm contributing. Like, I'm just one person. So I don't think that like my contributions are gonna like change things on like a grand scale per se. Like at like a social level. But like it's still like a hope that I have that. People just see me for who I am, and hopefully that helps them and helps other people in some way.
Well, don't think that you're just one person and therefore your contribution will not have an effect, because if you look at history, if you look at humanity's history, great things have happened by individuals taking on the challenge in working to bring about change in many profound ways. So look at yourself as yes, you are an individual, but you also have the ability to be able to influence and achieve what you want to achieve in a broader sense. A follow-up question to this is, again, this podcast is about how we African Australians are making a contribution to multicultural Australia. So, in your experience, are there areas of cultural and economic contribution that we make, including Gen Z, make to multicultural Australia that our fellow Australians don't see or overlook?
Well, you know what's funny is that I've seen recently that jollof rice has kind of entered the zeitgeist in a way. Like you know, like people from other cultures like are familiar with jollof rice now. Like I was at like a food, like the winter or summer food markets in oh my god, I remember the name. Wow. Queen Vic markets, yeah.
Oh, Queen Vic,
yeah.
yeah.
And yeah, I saw like a stand
In
for
Melbourne
like,
here, yeah.
and I saw a stand for like jollof rice, and I was like, wow, like people know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you're telling me that jollof rice has entered Australia's food culture?
Yeah. Well,
Wow, I didn't know that.
Well, even in other parts of the world, like you know, like in England and stuff, like people talk about jollof rice, and like you know, like they're not African, and it's interesting, right? So I guess that's like a cultural contribution right there. At least, like obviously, there's enough of a demand for jollof rice that you know it justifies businesses like providing them in Australia and overseas as well. So that's really great. So yeah, like I guess food's a big one.
Yes,
because you know like there is, you know, there's so many different cuisines in the continent of Africa. And you know, and I guess I say Gen Z, you know, has something to do with that only just because like it's something that I've seen recently. So I'm thinking, okay, like maybe our generation has taken to it in some way. Other kinds of contributions. Well, I mean, you know, like we're working in the economy like everyone else is. You know, we're providing services and stuff. You know, diversity brings like different experiences and perspectives, and that just helps things innovate faster. You know, like what I was saying before about these artists who didn't feel like they fit in growing up. That gave them a unique perspective on everything that they do, and that's like very, very invaluable. You know, like businesses and stuff, like they like to update and they like to stay ahead of the curve.
Yes.
And you know, a great way to do that is having different perspectives that might not know what has always been done, and will just bring a new sort of like flavor to doing things.
Yeah, well, I think one observation I have made is that increasingly African Australians are becoming more prominent in the caregiving industry.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and to me that is very important and interesting, particularly in the context of Australia's population aging. Again, to be more the need for more people to look after the older generation, and you know, I am encouraged by the fact that increasingly I'm seeing more African Australians in the care industry. But you know, again, from my experience, where we have African Australian lawyers, you know, scientists, athletes, but I like Australians to see us in a broader context, in every aspect of economic endeavor. And through this podcast, I aim to draw people from all sectors of Australia's socioeconomic world for them to tell their story like you're telling your story today. So again, coming back to you as an individual, how do you balance your personal goals with your desire to give back to community?
Well, you know, I would I hope even just by like doing this podcast, you know, like
Yes.
this is a like me speaking about this stuff is a step towards maybe like some other African Australians who are interested in the creative side of things to bring, you know, every full authentic part of themselves to the work that they're doing. So, you know, like a personal desire I have obviously is to keep making the stuff that, you know, I want to make and the stuff that's important and resonates to me. And it would be great if that's able to like galvanize somebody or like motivate them to do the same thing. It definitely is a balance you have to strike, because, you know, like this community, obviously, like, you know, when I speak with other awesome African Australian creatives, or, you know, if I see them do really great work, like obviously like someone like Genesis Owusu,
Owusu,
yeah,
yes.
and his brother Gajo as well, like they're doing really amazing stuff
Yes.
in the Australian media landscape, and like, you know, like they are such big inspirations to me. And so, you know, when I look at them, when I speak with them or other creatives from the African Australian industry, like I recognize obviously how much they've been able to help me, even just by you know, having their work and their art exist and be out there and bringing themselves fully to the table.
Yes.
That's something that I also want to pay forward in some way. You know, even if it's just to like my friends.
Yes.
So yeah, like there's a balance to be struck, but I think you can walk one and like the other will like just follow through naturally, I think.
Sure. Now, at the national level, is there like an association of African Australian creatives? And the reason I ask this question is that, you know, you agree with me that there is impact in numbers. And also, Australia, like any society, you know, being able to lobby decision makers goes a long way. And in my view, having an organization of African Australian creatives at the national level, having the opportunity then to articulate some of the issues that we've been talking about, the lack of visibility in the media. Do you think that if there isn't an organization like that, do you think that this is a project that you might be interested in taking on and bringing it to fruition?
Well, there actually, I know there are those organizations that do exist in Australia. You know, they offer grants for people in these sort of creative industries to sort of platform and profile the voices of African Australian creatives. And definitely that's a community that I would really want to be a part of, and I would definitely be interested in supporting them and like supporting their efforts and their endeavors to bring the voices of the community to the forefront. So, you know, like they're definitely out there at the lobbying level. I I know that there's, like for example, I know a little while ago there was a campaign called Make It Australian, which my understanding is that they were able to influence the Australian government to take like further action on seeing Australian stories brought to the screen. Now, this wasn't like for any particular group,
Yes.
but just Australians as a whole.
Yes.
And and so that's why we're seeing a lot of sort of set amounts of streaming services producing
Yes.
like set amounts of Australian stories.
Uh-huh.
So, like there is a pathway, I think, for like having productive conversations with the government to bring these kinds of voices to the forefront. Like that's the Make It Australian stuff has set a precedent for that.
Okay.
And it's been successful. And there's so much stuff happening. Like there's obviously Perth got a new, I believe it's Perth. Yeah, definitely Perth. They got a new studio. Very recently.
Okay.
Obviously Sydney and Brisbane's been doing a lot of stuff with Hollywood, and there's some stuff happening in the Central Coast as well. So, I feel like there's a lot of things happening right now to create sort of like the perfect environment for these groups to raise a profile of a whole bunch of different artists.
Well, we're coming to the end of this conversation, but I have two more questions or two more issues to discuss with you. So, given what we've explored today, what would be your advice to younger African Australians who will come after you?
I definitely feel like a bit of a broken record at this point because it is so important to me. But yeah, just be authentically yourself and don't worry about, like, if someone asks you where you're from,
Yes.
like you don't, like, like you're from Australia and you are Australian.
Exactly.
And no one else can decide that except you. And I
Yes.
guess me right now because I'm telling you to be like, you're Australian, but you know what I mean? No one can take that away
No.
from you.
Not at all.
So be yourself when it comes to your identity, when it comes to your art, make the stuff that you want to see because
Yes.
that's the type of art that actually connects, has the best, chance of connecting with the audience. Like Rick Rubin, who's an amazing, amazing, amazing creative, he says he has a whole, he has great lessons about being creative is that when you make art just for yourself, ironically, that's what ends up being best for the audience because audiences can tell when something is inauthentic.
Yes.
And, so that like, if you know you like it, someone else is going to like it.
Yes.
So you'll be set for that. So that's definitely some advice I would give to, the other African Australians out there.
Well, then based on that, then, I believe that I'm doing the right thing because I like this podcast.
Yes, you should. You should like, and like people, and then people shouldn't like. I love it when artists talk about how much they love their own stuff. Like, sometimes people think it's a bit like conceited if someone talks about how much they like something, but it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I love hearing people get excited about the stuff they make, and they
Yes.
can talk about like the details, and they get fired up about it because it's like, oh, you really do care about this.
Yes.
Like I should also care about it.
Absolutely. Okay, so finally, if I say we African Australians, we are here, what does that mean to you? The phrase "we are here."
Yeah, we are here. I mean, to me, immediately it's about belonging, and
Absolutely.
it's about support, and it's about contributing to the country, in all the great ways that every other culture and every other people contributes to this country. We do form the fabric of what makes this country like, work and be such like a productive economy, productive culture. Belonging is what I think about when I hear we are here.
On that note, Nii, thank you very much for a lovely conversation. Thank you. Well done.
All right, yeah, that was so much fun.
Thank you.